communication is vital on the battlefield, and one of the things that the Russians have been doing in their innovation is getting Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite communications capability. However, this is now beginning to impact them because in early February, SpaceX blocked the use of every Starlink geolocated on Ukrainian territory, including the ones used by Ukrainian forces. And only after verification and inclusion into what is named as a white list that is updated every 24 hours can they be brought back online. This is to try and identify the Starlinks that are on the good side that the Ukrainians are using against those that the Russians are using. And we've even seen Starlinks in some of the UAVs that have been flying against Ukrainian territory to try and stop them from being blocked by Ukrainian electronic warfare. So as Starlink fails, as ever, the Russians are trying to innovate around it. The Russians have got a good, strong space program, and Putin has pushed, suggested, is trying to create a Starlink alternative. However, the Russians don't have the real ability to bring in the technology that's needed to put this together in the timeline that's needed to impact the tactical battle that's going on today. This is a very long-term commitment, and whether the Russians will be able to do it or not is very questionable. So whilst all this is going on, Zaporizhzhia, the new hotspot on the front line. Reports in the last 24 hours from Russian telegram channels are that the Ukrainians have actually advanced up to 18 kilometers in some parts of the front line. The Ukrainians have not confirmed this, but for the Russians to be saying it, they've no reason to be lying. They've no reason to be suggesting that the Ukrainians are doing as well as they are. And when the Ukrainians keep silent, it usually means that they're having some success. Now let's look up at the skies in Ukraine as something critical is happening. Over the past year, Ukraine has destroyed about $4 billion worth of Russian air defences. On an operational level, this is a disaster for Russia. Unit Alpha, an elite special operations task force, has been credited with this astonishing result. Radar, command elements, as well as long and short range missile systems have all been taken offline by this crack team. The Donbass, Crimea, Mariupol, all have had strikes reported on these prize targets, blinding the Russian command from Ukrainian attacks in the sky. This is what, in military terms, we describe as suppression of enemy air defences. The Ukrainians are suppressing the Russian air defences. But why? Russian-held territory is now exposed further to the rear. This means that long-range Ukrainian drones can get through and strike more targets with more success. It also means that Ukrainian fixed-wing manned air systems can get closer to the front line and have a greater effect on the front line, but also potentially then reach over it into the Russian rear areas. You have to suppress an enemy's air defence to create what's called local air superiority over an area you want to fly your air assets, whether they be drones or whether they be manned. This skeleton air defence leaves Russia vulnerable. It's stretched and it gives the Ukrainian what I described as local air superiority. Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jets can operate with more freedom on the front and provide vital air support for the ground troops. They can move from intercepting missiles and drones at the rear to delivering close air support with devastating hammer bombs. All of this will and is making Putin think twice about his next move. Russian troops are concentrating along Ukraine's eastern and southern borders, specifically targeting Pokrovsk, which they've been trying to capture for over a year, and I expected it to fall before Christmas. It hasn't yet. Ukraine is holding on. But also targeting now in the Mariupol sector and around Zaporizhzhia, this new area of front line that is becoming the hotbed of activity. The offensive is expected to begin in late spring and in the east, targeting Sloviansk and Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region, the Donetsk Oblast, before then shifting south in early summer into the Zaporizhzhia region. Whether the Russians are going to be able to carry out an offensive within these two regions, or whether they're going to focus and concentrate on only one, is up for debate at the moment, but we're watching it closely. The secondary push towards Zaporizhzhia and Orikhiv aims to draw Ukrainian forces away from the main eastern front because Putin still wants to capture the whole of the Donbass as his number one priority. How much longer Putin can keep this bloody, attritional and costly war going is the key question. The other thing we have to recognize is the fact that during the winter months, Putin can't use his armoured forces, he can't use his vehicles to good effect, and therefore they will be withdrawn behind the front lines so they can be refurbished. They'll be concentrated in particular areas, and as soon as the ground is right for vehicles to be used again, we will see the offensive starting. This has happened last year, it happened the year beforehand. And whether the Russians can generate sufficient combat power to punch through the Ukrainians or not is debatable. They haven't done it before. It's unlikely they're going to do it now. So what we're seeing is Russia suggesting and maneuvering for an offensive at a time when diplomacy is going for peace. Zelensky is giving ground and is giving concessions to the Russians for negotiations. The Russians aren't doing anything. Every time they talk peace, they still bomb Kyiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia. We've even seen missiles hitting Lviv in the east. Kherson, Odessa are all getting hit by the Russians as they suggest they want peace from Ukraine. It's unlikely in what we're seeing here that we're going to have any move towards peace through the rest of this year. Economically, Russia is in dire straits with declining energy income, and Putin has raided Russia's national funds with over $50 billion spent so far to keep his war going. His so-called shadow fleet, the rust bucket tankers that transport oil around the world, are being targeted more and more in coordinated seizures across Europe, in the Atlantic, in the Americas, the Mediterranean and elsewhere. And a $73 billion deficit in Russia was reported at the end of 2025. How is that translating into the average Russian? Well, think cucumbers. In the last week, it's been reported that cucumbers have increased 425% in price. So as Russia prepares for offensive operations, Ukraine is preparing its defences. Across Ukraine's war-torn east, a new kind of battlefield is rising from the mud. A vast defensive network described by analysts as a multi-billion-dollar iron belt. Ukraine's $2 billion defensive line isn't about dramatic breakthroughs, it's about survival, it's about buying time and turning every metre of ground into a deadly obstacle course. A meat grinder for the Russian meat. This isn't one giant wall, it's a deep defensive system stretching across key regions. Hundreds of kilometres of trenches, anti-tank ditches, barbed wire and concrete dragon's teeth, all interspersed with anti-personnel and anti-tank mines, and where possible covered by direct fire weapons and indirect fire weapons if direct fire is not possible, designed to choke off Russian advance. And instead of relying on huge troop numbers, Ukraine is building up layer upon layer of engineered resistance. A battlefield maze. The idea is simple: turn every metre into a trap.